Welcome to Chefs Without Restaurants. I'm your host, Chris Spear. On the show, I speak with culinary entrepreneurs and people working in the food and beverage industry outside of a traditional restaurant setting. I have 31 years of working in kitchens, but not restaurants, unless you count Boston Market. Wait, should I? Is that a restaurant? And I currently operate a personal chef service during dinner parties in the Washington, D.C. area. Today, my guest is Pat Lee. Pat's a food content creator and private chef residing in Delaware. You might have seen his videos online where he goes by Cooking with Pat Lee. In his previous life, Pat worked in the financial industry. But in the early days of the COVID pandemic, he lost his job. Like many of us, he was spending a lot of time at home. And being unemployed, he was looking for ways to tighten his budget. One of the things he did was focus on cooking more meals at home. This eventually led to him creating cooking videos where he teaches people how to be better cooks at home. On this episode, we talk about the business of food content creation. We talk about community building and interacting with your followers. We discuss his creative process and what inspires him. Whether you're someone who's already creating content online, or maybe you started the journey and want to grow, or maybe you just enjoy consuming it, I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. I don't think all food content creators are created equally, and personally, I was especially drawn to Pat and his style. I love the way he both educates his audience and interacts with his community. So stick around, because this episode will be coming right up after a word from our sponsor.
As a lifelong bourbon enthusiast, I've always been captivated by its rich complexity and fascinated by its history. Bourbon was the first spirit I'd tried when I was old enough to drink. I only wish I'd started with the good stuff. That's why I'm excited to introduce you to Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond. Born from the Shapira family's unwavering passion since 1935, this bourbon's a testament to quality and tradition. Heaven Hill Distillery goes beyond the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897, aging this bourbon for 7 years, 3 more than required, creating a richer, more sophisticated flavor profile. When you select this premium Bottled and Bond bourbon, you're also ensured that you're getting a bourbon that's been made in a single distillation season and that it's been bottled at exactly 100 proof. This commitment to excellence is evident in every sip. But don't just take my word for it. Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond won the double gold at the 2023 World Spirits Competition in San Francisco, New York, and Singapore, as well as the 2023 Triple Still Award from the Tasting Alliance. Discover the award-winning Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond for yourself. Whether you enjoy it neat, on the rocks, or as the cornerstone of a cocktail, it's a bourbon that stands apart. Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond delivers a flavor profile that's unmatched. Available nationally at your local retailer. Embrace the premium quality that Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond brings to every sip. Heaven Hill reminds you to think wisely, drink wisely.
Hey, Pat, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Spring is here. I was saying before we started, spring is in the air. Got a little sinusy thing, but otherwise it's good to get out and see some sunshine finally.
It's no sunshine here, unfortunately. It looks like it's actually about to rain, which is kind of sad because it's May already, and I wish it was kind of sunny.
Yeah. I'm in Maryland, so not too far from you. You're up in Delaware. Mm-hmm. So just a couple hours. I could be up there in about 2 hours. So I want to start by saying, these days, so many of us are multi-hyphenates. We've got a lot of pots on the stove, if you will. How do you identify these days? You're out and someone says like, hey, what do you do? I don't really love that as kind of like an icebreaker, but I think when you're in a group of people, especially strangers, and people say, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
Usually when I speak with people and I meet them in person, I just tell them that I'm a food content creator and a private chef specializing in a variety of different recipes. And then from there, I like to talk about the different recipes that I like to make, the different things I like to cook. And then I kind of engage in a conversation with that person on, what do you like to cook, or what do you like to make, or what interests you about cooking? And then we just kind of go on from there and build that relationship all around food.
Ask them what they like before they ask you what your signature dish is, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
The question we always get.
Yeah.
But you didn't come up through food and cooking. You're not someone who has been, working the line since you were 17, didn't go to culinary school. In fact, you had a career outside the culinary industry. So I think that'd be a great place to kind of kick this off, is talk about, let's kind of start around the time of the beginning of the COVID pandemic, because I think for you professionally, that's when a lot of that changed. So Can you share that story a little bit about how you kind of made the move from corporate America into food and food content?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you said, I actually got my start working as a chef around the pandemic about 4 years ago. Just to give a little bit of backstory, before I became a chef, I worked in the financial industry as a bank manager and then a product owner for about 15 years. During the pandemic, like many folks across the world, I lost my job and I had to pivot my direction on what I wanted to do and who I wanted to become. Growing up, it wasn't always engraved in my brain that, you could do something that you're passionate about. From a very young age, I was always told to go in a linear direction, go to college, get a great paying job, and I should be fine. No one really expressed to me that you can do things that involve happiness, creativity, and passions. So because that wasn't really something that I was exposed to as a child, I went to school, I got my bachelor's and master's degrees, I had a really good job, but I wasn't happy. I did perform well at the jobs that I had because I don't like to embark on tasks, for the benefit of failing. But none of these jobs at my core made me happy. So when I initially lost my job, I thought to myself, what could I do that would make me happy? What could I do that if I were to do it all day, every day, on my feet, hours on end, I could, at the end of the day say, this is what makes me smile. This is what I'm proud about. And it took me a while to figure that out because I was still deep into my whole, wow, I don't have a job anymore phase. Like, what am I going to do? So around this time, my wife and I were kind of, doing some brainstorming, because, we were going to be down one source of income. So one of the things we had to do, aside from, managing our expenses and luxuries, was tighten our budget. And a lot of that involved food. So instead of ordering, out every other day, which we did because we were busy at work, we decided that we were going to cook more. And it went from, cooking every other day or twice a week to me cooking every single day. I have been cooking since I was 7 years old, cooking for my mom and cooking for my family. But it wasn't anything like I'm doing now. It was, simple comfort meals that, you learn to cook, bake a chicken, make some vegetables, potatoes. But going back fast forward into 2020, I started cooking daily. I started watching YouTube. I started getting into social media, just to kill time while I'm cooking. And one of my favorite food influencers, I happened to notice, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with him, Joshua Wiseman.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's a great chef. And I saw him on YouTube and I saw his videos. And what instantly gravitated me towards him was just the fact that not only was he a fellow cook and an influencer, but he was somebody that actually seemed like he was passionate about teaching people how to cook. I grew up watching Emerald Live. I grew up watching Barefoot Contessa, America's Test Kitchen. And aside from Test Kitchen, I didn't know of any other shows that would teach you, the why behind cooking. You would see recipes being made on television and it would be, take these ingredients and make them. But they would never tell you why you want to cut your carrots a certain way or why you want to cook things at a certain temperature. These were things that I was starting to learn on social media. And I said to myself, this was something that I actually want to do myself because I love teaching people things. I love cooking. And I just love the whole idea of getting people together and just having these conversations. So I started recording myself, with my humble phone camera and the light that I had around the house. Nothing like I have right now, but I wanted to get a start into, just diving into the whole atmosphere of cooking online.
What was that first recipe that you did online? Do you remember the first video that you posted?
It was actually a pork chop video. I do remember my grandmother, who is actually one of my biggest influences in cooking. She made pork chops for us every Thursday night, but she would fry pork chops. And although I do like fried food, you do see some fried food recipes on my page. I don't like eating fried food constantly. I try to be, what I show on social media may be, just for the show, but I actually try to be a little bit more health conscious at home. So I made pork chops and I just took, a stick of butter, took some herbs, kind of put it and wrapped it together. And I made a little compound butter and it didn't really get much viewership on social media, but I was actually proud of the fact that I tried something new. And it kind of gave me the confidence that I needed to not only, post videos on social media, but also know that, hey, you're learning something new and you're doing something that you've never done before. Where else can you go with this?
Where did you put that video? Was it TikTok, YouTube, Instagram? Did you blast it out to everywhere?
I posted it on TikTok. It didn't get any viewership, unfortunately. And oddly enough, TikTok flagged it for some reason and removed the video. I'm not 100% sure why, but nevertheless, it's still saved in my phone. I look at it from time to time just to remind myself, this is where you were at one point. This is how far you've come, and just keep pushing forward.
So at that point, was it just like a personal account? Had you thought about a name for was it so much thought into it that you're I'm going to name this page and it's going to be about cooking? Or was it just put it out on my personal page? What was that like?
Initially, it was just me putting it on my personal page because at the time I wasn't really, I guess you could say, brand conscious. It was more so for me just to have personal photos and videos on my page. And then over time, as I started to network more with people and started to, see what other chefs and creators were doing, I kind of gave myself, the label of Cooking with Pat Lee, because I wanted to show, just like the name itself, that food should be something that should be simple and accessible to just about anybody.
Yeah, I think we're in an interesting space right now with social media and especially cooking videos, because it seems like there's very dramatic, over the top, not even realistic cooking, right? There's a lot of stuff out there that looks amazing, but nobody is cooking that. You could do one dish of it, but you couldn't feed a family of 4 or let alone make it in a restaurant. We're doing it just for the views and the likes and the artistry, which is fine. It's its own thing, but it's not a realistic cooking. That's my opinion. You see these dishes where it's wow, they put 20 hours of work into this one plate. How realistic is that? But your food seems to really be focused on recipes that people would make at home for consumption.
I definitely do agree with that. And admittingly, at one point, I did make recipes to be flashy. It wasn't an everyday occurrence, but it was just more so just to kind of challenge my own creativity. But I definitely do agree with you, especially when it comes to food on social media. There's a lot of recipes out there that are just way over the top. It's nice to look at, and I treat it like a movie. It's good on the eyes. It's great in the eyes. It's entertaining, but the average consumer isn't going to go and make this recipe. It's good for just what it is, content. And while that's great and everything, I want to make recipes that, the average parent or the average, food novice can go and say, hey, I can try to make this. Now, I do admit there are some recipes that I like to make from scratch. And, that's just for me to learn how to make them from scratch. But I always advise my audience, you don't have to make this recipe from scratch. For example, I had a recipe where I made brioche French toast. And just for a learning experience, I made brioche bread on my own. And I, gave the recipe to my audience. But I did tell them, hey, you can just go simply buy a brioche loaf of bread from the grocery store and just use that. I want to give you the option of saying, hey, I can either make this myself or I can just buy the ingredients at the store and make it. But I want to give people that chance to say, if I have a recipe and I can make this at home, I feel a little bit more confident in the kitchen and not give them any reason to be scared of cooking.
Absolutely. Right now, I'm big into making pizza at home. And I say, if you're not ready to do the dough at home, just make pizza sauce. Instead of buying this overly processed, jarred sauce, learn how to make, a good tomato sauce for pizza at home. It's 3 ingredients. You don't have to start with the dough. I make my own tortillas. I try and get people to do that and say, it's really not as hard as you think. But I understand if you're not going to. So here's a salsa recipe, or, here's how I did the braised pork to go in there. I think, some people need baby steps and some people are more advanced. There's home cooks out there who blow my mind with the stuff they're doing. People who have full-time jobs doing, they're accountants and they're making better pasta than you could get in any restaurant out there. I'm just floored by the caliber of people who are just, they love it and they're doing it at home.
That's actually where I'm at right now. I still do have a full-time job and I do manage content creation. I'm actually coming in the last month of my job because I'm actually going to start doing this on a more full-time basis, just to see how far I can go. But it is challenging. I do admit that, there are some moments where I do kind of wish I had more time to, rest and just unwind. But as I've, told my family and I have spoken, before to people, this is something that I'm passionate about. This is something that I feel like not only can give me a sense of fulfillment, but give my family an opportunity to live comfortably. And if it means, having to be exhausted for, a few months or a few years, so be it. Like I said earlier, this is something that I could do for hours on end, whether social media was involved or not, and actually love to do because I love cooking for people. I love the idea of just seeing people smile when they taste my recipes. Even with this podcast, I love having conversations with, people like you, and we can just kind of engage on, our histories with food and our experiences and kind of, sharing that interest amongst one another.
So when you do the content creation cooking videos, are you trying to time it around mealtime at your house so then, we're done and then it's dinner on the table for the family?
That's a great question. So whenever I'm cooking, usually whenever I cook my videos or make my videos rather, I tend to do them in batches because it can be time consuming to, record every single day. So I'll make, maybe like 3 or 4 recipes a day, and I'll have my family, just kind of pick at everything throughout the day, and whatever's left, I'll give it to, friends or family because I don't want food to go to waste. But after, the content creation is done and we're finished recording, I'll just, whip up something simple and easy for us to eat in like 30 minutes or so. One thing that I actually have started doing is I want to give my supporters a sense of accuracy when it comes to cooking. So if I say, hey, you can make this meal in under 45 minutes, I'll have my cameras recording, but I'm actually like putting a timer on my other phone and setting myself to that exact time so I can know where I can make adjustments at to make this as simple and easy as possible. I
think that's great because I've, cookbooks these days or recipes online will give you a time frame, and I find they don't always line up. Of course, there's a huge curve based on skill, right? Like I can cut onions and celery and mirepoix and stuff probably faster than like a person who has no culinary experience. So there is some flexibility, but to give a real accurate time frame, I think is important because people really need to know. I mean, it's hard.
Yeah. And I'd also think people don't realize that when a lot of these recipes are made while, the prep time is the time that's set and, the cook time is what it is. There's a lot of things that go on before that, such as the mise en place, just making sure that you have all of your ingredients lined up. You want to make sure that you have your onions chopped properly. You want to make sure all of your ingredients are kind of in place. And I do tell my audience that as well, because I feel like a lot of times when we make recipes, because this is something that I kind of went through myself when I first started, you're often, let's say, for example, you're making pork shoulder. And you need to get your seasonings and you need to get your, anything you want to braise it, get your knives and everything out. You could have everything ready to cook, but then you look to your left and your right and you go, oh no, I forgot my salt. So now instead of, having that already prepared, you got to rush to get your seasoning while the stove is on and you risk the chance of burning your oil. So when I make my recipes, I like to let people know, you want to make sure that this is done before you cut your oil on, because you want to make sure that once the oil is nice and hot, your meat can go in the pan, and then you have your seasonings right next to you and you can put your seasonings on, and, just different things like that to kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, opening Pandora's box when it comes to cooking, just not telling people that, you can make this in 30 minutes, but letting them know realistically, while you can make this in 30 minutes, there's other prep that has to be involved to allot for that time.
I've had 2 guests on the show who do live cooking classes, like live streamed, and they're in their house. And they talk about that. Like once you get going, you can't stop. So they get really good about prep. And, one of the things they tell their attendees prior is like, this is how you get the prep set up, because they're only going to be on this call for, an hour, hour and a half, whatever. And having that mise en place ready to go. Again, they talk about it's something that not everyone's used to. And they really have to give everyone a primer on that before they get going so that they can just kind of bang through these recipes.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
So you're not an overnight success, but why you? Like there's thousands of content creators, people doing food out there. You have over 130,000 followers on Instagram alone, which seems crazy. I mean, there's like really amazing chefs out there who've been doing this for a long time who have, like brand recognition and are household names, but you've really popped off. Do you have any insight as to like why, what brought people to you specifically? Any idea?
So I have to ask myself this question every single day, why me? And it's not, to discredit myself, but it's more so coming from, humble beginnings and just being grateful for the opportunities I've been given. But I do feel like people gravitate towards me because I like to keep things honest when it comes to not just what I'm cooking, but my actual content. I'm not somebody who I feel like needs to do over the top cooking or needs to do anything flashy. I'm just a regular guy from Delaware, just looking to cook for my family and give people a chance to feel empowered by cooking. I think people kind of gravitate towards that. They see me as someone who's actually looking to teach them to cook, So I don't like to make recipes that I feel are pretentious. I like to cook things that I feel like I would like to try. I like to cook things that I feel like, someone who's never made a recipe before can learn how to make. And I also feel like I like to interact with people. That's one of the things that I speak on heavily when it comes to social media content is I feel like a lot of food creators, the more and more they grow, the less they interact with their audiences. Whereas I've said from day one, from the moment I first started making food content and I had maybe 5 or 10 followers, if you comment on any of my posts, if you send me a message or if you want to chat, I'll find the time to chat with you because I feel like these are the people who built me up to this level. And it would be completely pretentious of me to just ignore them when they're the ones who, purchase my ebooks. They're the ones who share my recipes. They're the ones who, post in their Instagram stories and say, hey, Chef Pat, I made this inspired by you. Like, what kind of person would I be to just ignore you? Like, I appreciate that. It makes me feel like I'm making a difference in these people's lives.
Something I think that's interesting because I, follow a lot of people and lurk in the comments is I see a lot of these content creators and they interact a lot with other content creators, but not the everyday person. So, a well-known influencer chef will post something and all these people comment and they're not commenting at all on it. But then like a Josh Weissman leaves a comment and they reply to that. And to me, it just looks so like lopsided. Like they're only interested in having conversation with the big names in their space, but like Joe Smith down the street isn't good enough. And I know if you've got like 3,000 comments on a post, you can't go in under every one of them, but it just seems like it's just these like people pumping each other up in some regard. So I really like, what you're saying. For me, community is everything. Chefs Without Restaurants is a community and was a community before a podcast built on the premise of like, let's help other people build and grow their own food businesses and help each other along the way. So anyone who's about the community, I'm a big fan of that.
I wholeheartedly agree. And it is something that not only have I've noticed, but a lot of my supporters have actually brought to my attention. I have seen it before, and it's actually something that it's actually one of the reasons why I am the way who I am today. Because even when I first started, doing content creation and even learning about the food industry, I would reach out to some of these big names and, not even to, be a fan, but just to get some information on, cooking techniques or just to learn. And a lot of times my comments were left on read or my DMs were like left seen, but not responded to. But, you would see that a celebrity or someone famous would reach out to them and they would have all the time in the world. And I always took that to myself as one, I wouldn't want to make people feel how I felt. So I do make sure, like you said, there are times where it's kind of hard if you have like 3,000 comments to respond to everybody. But I at least try my best to, put some time aside to acknowledge those people. And I tell people this all the time, you shouldn't discredit anybody just because of their status. You never know who you're going to interact with. You never know who you're going to get the chance to meet. I've actually met people who have actually helped me become better chefs, and they come to me for social media advice, and I have more followers, but they have more experience in cooking and more, networking capabilities within the industry. So we kind of help each other out, and that's really what it's all about.
Have you done any collaborations with anyone in the food content creation space? And, what does that look like in the future? Any plans to do so?
I do have a few collaborations in the works. My most recent one was with one of my good friends, Chili Pepper Cooks. He's another influencer and chef based out of Maryland, who actually just opened up his Flavor High food truck and is doing very well. But, those are the type of people I like to collaborate with. Like, I don't see myself collaborating with a lot of chefs who are more about the pizzazz and the flair. I, work with people who I feel like genuinely love what they're doing. So I do have a lot of those in the works, pretty soon, just working some details out. But yeah, if anybody out there is listening, I don't discriminate when it comes to collaborations. I don't discriminate when it comes to networking and working with people. So if you want to collaborate, whether it's, having a conversation, if you want to, meet up and just cook, by all means, let me know.
Meet up and just cook is like something I'm really interested in. That's something I've done around here, like not for the not for the gram, right? I think there's a danger of like putting everything out publicly. And I think sometimes it's good to just network and hang out with people, right? And not make it a big media circus kind of thing. You know, I'm in a couple masterminds with some food content creators where, you know, we talk about not recording it. We do a meeting like this, but there's 8 of us on and we just get together, and sure, you could probably record it and put it out there to bring value to people, but it's nice to just like be in a space with people and exist and do things and not have it always be public facing.
I definitely do agree with that. You know, not everything needs to be for the camera, and it kind of shows and builds that level of trust with the other person because they know you're not doing this just to get some exposure, but you're doing this just to, you know, build a connection.
So where do you find your creative influences from a culinary standpoint? Like what is getting you going these days?
There's so many influences out there that I feel like if you're a chef and you say you lack motivation, I often challenge that. There's Pinterest, there's YouTube, there's other forms of social media. There's a library of cookbooks, which I have almost like 3 bookshelves worth of cookbooks. You know, sometimes even as a chef, even if you can't get influences from the outside, kind of think from within. I always tell people, and this is actually, you know, something that I hold true, look in your cabinet. You don't necessarily have to make a recipe in the traditional sense. You know, try to put things together, you know, go through trial and error, and you get inspiration that way. Some of my best recipes have come from, you know, missing a couple of key ingredients. And instead of going to the grocery store, I think, what could I substitute to make this ingredient or this recipe come to life? And, you know, it's just that critical thinking process that kind of, I feel, makes me a great chef, because if I were to work in an actual restaurant and let's say, for example, I'm making a steak and potato dish and I happen to run out of, you know, milk, is there anything I can do to substitute to make those mashed potatoes? Pretty sure there is. There's plenty of things I can do to substitute. I can probably use chicken broth. I can probably use some other type of liquid ingredient. But, you know, just kind of having that mindset helps that creative process, because it makes it so this way you're not stuck or you kind of rely on what's traditional or the norm.
Do you find inspiration from things outside of the cooking world? You know, I talk to a lot of people about music or taking a day to walk around a museum or just getting out in nature. Like, I find that gets me going. Is there anything like that you find especially helpful to you, just to kind of like, I don't know, open your mind?
I'm not sure how this is going to come across, but I often listen to the news when it comes to get inspiration. And the reason why I do that is because I feel like when I listen to the news, there's just so much depressing things that go on in this world. And I think to myself, what could make people happy and what could kind of, you know, bring people together? And that inspires me to cook great dishes because, you know, like I've said before, I feel like food is one of the things that brings us all together. We all have different experiences when it comes to food. We all have memories from, you know, when our grandparents cooked for us to the very first time we made a meal. And just kind of hearing, you know, the things that go on in the world and just hearing all the sad news about wars and, you know, crime. And I think to myself, there's so much of that going on in the world. Let's put something positive out there. Let's put something out there that people could actually look to and just kind of take their minds off of the negativity. And I use a lot of that inspiration when it comes to my cooking to, you know, showcase to my audiences. I like to make things that I feel like would bring people together. And, you know, even if it's just for a brief moment, you know, you may know that there's something going on in the world that may be devastating, but just for a few minutes, you can just take the time and look at a recipe and go, okay, well, we can all come together and share our experiences about the first time our grandmother made a meal or the very first time you cooked something and it didn't work out too well.
That's interesting. I had no idea where you were going. You know, are you going to make dishes based on the political candidates? I was like, the news is inspiring him. Like, what are you talking about? So from the like content side, how much learning did you have to go through with cameras, lights, angles, editing? Was that, to me, that's even like a bigger learning curve. Like, even if you don't have culinary experience like I do, if I was starting and had no experience cooking and no experience with that, I find that to be more daunting. What was your experience with that?
Whew. This kind of goes back to what I was saying before about reaching out to people and being left on red and not getting any responses. A lot of what I had to do with, you know, recording and lighting and editing has been self-taught. I know that it's not something that's easy to do or easy to teach people, you know, through messaging. it was a lot of times looking at YouTube videos and kind of getting the grasp of the basics, or a lot of trial and error. I'm still learning to this day, editing and, proper angles and just different things that I could do to make my content unique. And it's definitely not easy. It's something that I feel like does take a steep learning curve to kind of get a grasp around. But it is something that I feel like is another reason why I feel like my audience does kind of gravitate towards me, because I'm literally a one-man team. Like, I do have help from my family from time to time, but when it comes to filming my content, when it comes to editing, when it comes to the angles, taking pictures, this is all me doing it by myself. And it's not necessarily because, I don't want to or can't afford to get somebody to film my videos or to film my content or edit. It's more so because at the heart of it all, I want to be able to kind of be one of those people that kind of has his hands on everything, because I like to learn. I like to learn things, like to have an understanding of why things are the way they are. So if there ever becomes a time where I can, pass that off to somebody to record my videos or to edit, at the ground of it, I can, have my input on it, and I can kind of have a knowledge or a basis behind it, as opposed to just, being completely naive on what the process is or how to navigate with the different tools that, are required to kind of make all this come together.
Well, even if you do get to a point where you hire people, I think it's always good to have the base knowledge. Like, once you've gone through it and you know what goes into it, you know what to look for in someone who's going to be your videographer, editor, whatever. They can't pull the wool over your eyes and, tell you what's possible and what's not, because you've done it and you've been in that spot before. So I think it's always good, especially when you're starting out, to just kind of figure out as much as you can, especially if you like learning.
Yeah.
How much do you feel that you are following the news of like the algorithms and that, and there's a couple things. Like right now I'm seeing people talk about going from short form to long form. There's been discussions about like, hey, I've seen a lot of food content creators specifically saying like, I think I'm kind of like over the 60-second recipes and I'm going to go back to more long form content on YouTube. Where are you standing between long form, short form right now?
I'm actually trying to transition more into long form content. It's not necessarily because of the algorithm or trends. It's more so because, like we've discussed, I like to teach people. I like to educate people on the why behind cooking and give people, the empowerment to make recipes. But I also feel like those 30 or 60-second videos, there's not enough time to kind of show the steps. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with some of the videos you see on social media where it's like the creator will say, here's my recipe for baked salmon. And it's literally 10 seconds where every single ingredient, it just zooms on by, from the chopping to the put in the oven, the sauteing, and then the final product. And then it's like, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? Whereas long form content, you get to see everything. And that's what I want to do with my videos. I want to show people, hey, I'm going to make this recipe. Here's how I made it. We'll go from this point to that point, and we'll go from the next point until we finish the actual recipe. And I think a lot of people, while, the 60-second videos were good for the time, at the time when the pandemic was, a thing, more and more people want to actually cook, but they also want to know how to cook, and they need to know, step by step. I'm somebody who I feel like I can do things visually, just by looking at a video, but I can also read, recipe instructions and kind of, get an idea on how to make things, because, that's what I've practiced and, trained to do for the past 4 years. But there are people who kind of need that visual aid to say, okay, I don't know necessarily how to hold a knife properly or how to grip an onion and do the proper cutting technique. Like, you can tell them to do that, but it's easier to show people the claw technique and how to properly grab a knife in a long form video. Whereas in a short form video, you have to kind of think of the key points to get their attention. And again, we're in an industry where we're trying to teach people how to cook long term. So long form does make the best sense for me.
Well, I think it depends on where do you want to be on the axis of education, entertainment. There's full entertainment. There's full education. There's what they call edutainment, right? And I think a lot of this is just, it's for the likes, the views, the notoriety, but it's entertainment. It's not really teaching anyone anything. Now, you might need to use some of those funny edutainment type videos to then convert people over and say like, hey, if you, like my food, like my style, hop on over to YouTube where I'm going to teach you how to make the full dish. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But there's clearly people who are just out there, it's entertainment. And I'd much rather people watch food, entertainment than some of the reality show nonsense out there. So at least they're interested in food. But it's good to see people kind of moving into the long form culinary education. I really think that's exciting.
I agree. I kind of treat it as natural selection when it comes to creating content. I've seen a lot of creators, even when I started to now, who they see people cook food on social media and they go, oh, well, I can do that. And, they do the videos where it's like you get the 60 seconds of the wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, the quick shots and everything. But then they realize over time, there's going to be more and more people who do videos like that. And so they're just looking for the next person to entertain them and to wow them. And that's when you get those videos where you kind of have to go over the top and, just keep one-upping everybody else. And then you get to a point where it's like, well, I don't have the expensive camera to do this. I don't have the expensive editing software to make these videos fancy. So then people give up. Whereas a long form content, that takes dedication. It takes time. There's more editing to do. There's a lot more filming. There's a lot more steps. And so in addition to, naturally trying to get the audience's attention, you're also showing that you're putting a lot more effort into making these videos because you want people to see the entire cooking process.
And I think there's also the thing of trends versus authenticity. It kind of bothers me. And I talk a lot about this. I actually talked to my last podcast guest about this because, if you go online and you follow these people in the media space, they say use trending. You want to get your reels seen, use trending audio, use these creators' templates, whatever. But aren't we just teaching people to be like everyone else? Like, when did we stop encouraging originality? I don't know. Just to me, the whole thing is like, use these trends and follow these trends instead of like being authentically yourself.
One of the things that I definitely do agree with you on, and it's something that I feel like people like about my page, is that I'm very anti-trend. I don't like cooking a lot of the recipes that go viral. I don't like to use a lot of the songs that go viral. I don't like to use a lot of the videos that go viral because I feel like, let's say, for example, you have I'm trying to think of a recipe that went viral. The Big Mac, it was a Big Mac smash burger taco. The one where you put like the patty on top of the tortilla and you kind of smash it.
Absolutely.
I thought it was ridiculous. I could see no way how that could possibly be fully cooked. I thought it was just done just to get attention. And I tell people all the time, like, you can do a trend and get viral videos, but the more you do trends, you're just becoming everybody else. There's going to be millions of videos where somebody sees, if you don't hop on that trend when it first happens, somebody's going to see your video and go, well, I've seen it already. Skip. Do
we need another butter board, right?
Oh, God. Don't get me started on that butter board. Unsanitary. There's so many reasons why I hated that butter board. But even using the butter board as an example, if you have 1 million people doing the butter board and you're not one of the first, let's say, 100 people to do the butter board, by the time somebody gets to your video and you say, let me show you my way of the butter board, I've seen it before. Scroll. Whereas if you do something that's like unique to you, where it's original, not necessarily original because I don't think there's any original recipes, but if it's something that actually genuinely captures the interest of somebody, that's going to get precedence over a viral video.
Now, you just said you don't think there's any original recipes. I agree somewhat. I do think there are some really original recipes out there. So kind of continuing with that, do you feel like you have any, like, what's something you've made that you think was pretty original? Like, you put a lot of work in. Do you have any dishes where you kind of, I don't know, wowed yourself, but like created something that wasn't just like recreating a pesto pasta or something?
So one of the recipes that I would say that I made that I can guess is slightly original, I actually made a deconstructed beef patty, but I made it in nacho form. So instead of making the empanada dough and making it into the beef patty, I took the empanada dough and rolled it out and cut it up into little nacho pieces. And I took the ingredients that usually would be inside of the beef patty and kind of put it on the outside and made it that way. And I wouldn't necessarily say it's original in a sense because it's still at the core nachos and still a deconstructed beef patty. But when I mention not all recipes being original, I say that in a sense of this comes from just my experience as a creator. There are a lot of creators out there who are very, for lack of a better term, they're very hard-headed when it comes to their recipes. They think that whatever content they create, they're the very first person to make this. And if somebody else comes and makes something similar to that, they think that, oh, my page was the first place you saw it first. And I'm like, I've seen this on Pinterest 10 years ago. I read this in a cookbook when I was a child. Like, nothing is 100% completely original. And that's where I come from when I mention originality, is that at some point, every chef or every creator gets influence from somewhere. So to create something that's completely original, I would have to think that it's never been seen anywhere before. And that's kind of hard to disprove.
Yeah, I think remixes are still original. Like if I went online today and saw a beef patty nachos, I'd be like, that's Pat's recipe. I think it's original. You're kind of remixing things. You're taking traditional flavors and styles and techniques and putting them into a new thing. But yeah, no, it's not original in the sense of like combining that type of dough and the flavoring of that meat. Yes, we are all probably familiar with a beef patty, but that sounds pretty original to me.
I haven't actually seen anybody create anything similar. And probably after the podcast, I'll Google it just to type in beef patty nachos and see what comes up. But I like to think that, like I said, while recipes do have our own flair and spin on it, I would like to at least think that, we get our inspirations at least from somebody. And, we can't we can claim that, there are recipes out there that have our signature touch in it, but to say they're 100% original without any inspiration, I just feel like that's just kind of doing a disservice to people who've, made recipes for years before social media was a thing.
I think every recipe comes from inspiration. I pull inspiration from everywhere. I'm always looking for that thing, going through a cookbook. And from a consumer standpoint, I mean, I'm a personal chef. I cook for people. My customer base doesn't like a lot of these crazy modern dishes. What I find they like is like elevated comfort food, something that there's a baseline that you can relate to. So I could say, well, it's like this, but this is what I've done to it. Like they have to have a reference point because, I'm pitching them a menu via email and they look at this thing. And if they're like, I have no idea what any of these ingredients, techniques, or dishes are, they're just not going to pick them. So I have to give them some reference point. So me personally, that's where I've been most successful, is finding these things that people are familiar with, but then just kind of putting an interesting spin on it.
That's actually something I do with a lot of my customers as well. And I often find that while we see a lot of people on social media that like gravitate towards these extraordinary recipes, people at home are either comfortable with what they used to have been eating, or they see these things and they go, well, I'm not going to eat all that or even try to make all that. So one of the things that I've tried to do for a lot of my private chef clients is they'll ask for, something simple like, hey, can I get a salmon dish? Or, whatever the case is. And I'll make their meal upon their request. But I'll also do something like when their dinner is ready, I'll go, hey, I'm happening to make this as, something that I'm going to introduce to my audience on social media. Would you like to try it out just to see how it is? I don't charge them for it. I don't, ask for anything other than just to give their honest opinion on it. And, sometimes they'll say, hey, this tastes good, or it may be a little bit too complex for their liking, or it may not, taste good at all. But I appreciate that feedback because it kind of gives me an idea on what I can go forward with and what I can make when it comes to my recipes on social media. And it also gives me an idea on if my client doesn't like it, how would the entire world perceive it? Like I wouldn't put something out there that I feel like would jeopardize my reputation as a chef. I do want to be as creative as I possibly can, but I also want to, respect the fact that, not everything that I'm going to make is going to be accepted within the eyes of the public.
That's a really great way to test out your recipes before they go live to everyone, is to kind of just offer up a comp course for people to try. I hadn't thought about doing anything like that. I mean, similarly, my most requested and loved dishes, I'm often creating, but I'm not I'm not really scaling up my content where I feel like I need to have that many things. So for me, it's just like when I think about like, oh, people really love this dessert, I should probably like make it and put the recipe up to share. So like kind of transitioning there, you work as a private chef. How's that work been going for you?
It's actually been pretty good. Business has kind of slowed down for the past few months or so because I've had other projects that I've been doing, and I kind of put a lot of focus on the job that I had, my 9 to 5. But I have actually started to get a little bit more people to reach out to me and say, hey, are you still catering? Are you still doing private chef work? And it actually honestly came at a time where I'm not sure if you're familiar, but a lot of my audience is, I've been working for a company since the pandemic. After I, decided I want to do the chef venture, because while it is nice to, be a private chef and a content creator, I'm not at that position to where I can do it fully and say this is my career. And, just like a lot of people who are working jobs now, companies unfortunately do layoffs, and companies, have to do what they do for their business. And, my company that I'm working for now is actually doing that with my department. And, I don't take any ill will towards it. Business is business. But when I have my clients reach out to me and say, hey, we miss your cooking, are you still available to do private dining or do catering? It had me thinking to myself, maybe this is the call for me to just get back into it and embrace it fully. And I actually have a lot more people reaching out to me than I did when I first started it to do private dining and do catering. And I've been a little bit more busy right now doing that on top of the content creation. And I feel like, and I'll ask you this question as well, because I do feel this myself. I feel like I get a lot more sense of fulfillment when I actually cook for people than I do content online, because while I can do content online and, people get to see my food, the real reaction for me is when they actually get to taste it. And I'm somebody who I feel like I appreciate that more, because if I'm cooking for somebody for the very first time, it can be very nerve-wracking. You've never had this person try your food before. They're basing their trust on you off of a recommendation or just seeing you on social media. And so that's a big expectation to live up to. So when they take that first bite, I'm like literally sweating on top of what I'm sweating from cooking. And I'm waiting for that first initial reaction. And when I see that their eyes close and I hear that first, that brings a smile on my face, because it makes me know I did a really good job. And it just makes me proud to just do what I do.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I do it. I mean, I'm kind of the flip. I've been cooking since I was 16 and I'm 47. It's all I've done, So before I put any content online, I was cooking. Mm-hmm. My personal chef business, I started in 2010 as a side job. And I tell so many people, if they're interested in this, like you, it's a great side job. Once you know what you're doing and have done it a little bit, you can go a month without doing it, but then you have a weekend off and someone reaches out. If you've got the skill set, you can go do it. It's like great side work. So for me, that's my wheelhouse. And I've been doing this full time since 2016. So, new adventure multiple times a week, just going into people's homes and new places, new spaces, new dishes, new kitchens. But bringing my food to people, there's nothing like people, raving about your food and having an amazing time. And I think the fortunate thing about what I do is I only do like parties. It's not meal prep and stuff. So every time I go out, it's, an anniversary, a birthday, a bachelorette party. We're celebrating something. So the vibe is always amazing. One time I did a dinner where the people were fighting and we actually had to stop in the middle of dinner, and they're not from America. So they were fighting in another language and screaming, and people left the house during dinner. And but other than that, it's been a 99.9% amazing time every time I've had a dinner.
Well, that's still a high success rate.
Yeah. I mean, families, once they get around the dinner table, sometimes, I mean, if they were fly on the wall at some of my dinners here at my house, yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but at least from my personal experience, the one thing I love about being a private chef is the brotherhood and sisterhood. I've often found that once I start networking with a lot of these chefs, they'll invite me to events to help them cook. Or if I need, a sous chef to help me when I'm doing an event, someone will be more than happy to raise a hand and assist. And I feel like that's one of the things I love about not just cooking, but just the business in general, is that unlike other companies, like when I worked in retail banking, there was a lot of cutthroat activity where people just wanted to get to the top and they didn't mind stepping over you to get there. Whereas in the culinary industry, everybody looks out for everybody. We're here to help each other. And I couldn't think of a better place to be personally.
So that's how Chefs Without Restaurants started. So very briefly, like if you don't know, and for any of my listeners who don't know, that's how it started. Because once I started my business, everyone was asking me like, how do you start a business? Can you tell me? And, we're doing that. And then I found that, I'm booked on Saturday night and a customer reaches out and wants a dinner. So it's like, what can I do with this referral? Well, now I know like 3 people I can share it to. So it's like, we built this community. It started as a Facebook group. that I thought was going to be like 7 people that I knew. And now we have 1,600 members. And so much of it is gig referral. Like I really built it because I was tired of paying money to platforms that were taking cuts where it's like, well, we should have enough referrals that we can share around. Oh, and by the way, I have no employees. So what do I do when I have a party for 15? Wouldn't it be great to, hire someone I know, someone in my community, throw some money in their pockets? I love having this rotating group of other culinary professionals in the area that I can rely on to go do dinners with.
It's a beautiful thing.
It is. And I guess like to kind of round it out, because you didn't have enough things going, you started a podcast too. Like, why not?
Yeah. So it's actually something that I've actually wanted to do for a while. I love talking with people. I love having conversations about food. And it actually got inspired, ironically, by my youngest son. Most people know this, but for those of you who don't know this, I have a disabled son. He's on the autism spectrum. And a lot of what he does, unfortunately, is limited. But one of the things that he loves to do is he loves to watch me cook. He, sits in the kitchen whenever I'm cooking and he likes to help out. He'll pass me an ingredient and he'll stare. And I feel like that's a great way for him to learn. And it got me to thinking, there are so many people out there who watch cooking. There are so many people who see visually, what goes on in the kitchen on YouTube or what goes on social media. But what about the audio experience? What about the people who, who may be blind and who can't actually see the videos, but actually want to hear what we're doing in the kitchen? The people who like ASMR content, or, there's people who, let's say, for example, you might be running errands and you have a YouTube show on, but you can't actually see it, but you hear it. So that got me to thinking, in addition to doing interviews with, some great chefs and people in the industry, I could do food-based content where it's a completely audio experience. So a great deal of my podcast is you can see the recipes that I make on YouTube or Instagram or social media, but the podcast gives you an actual audio version of it. So you can hear the pots and pans in the background. You can hear the sizzling. It puts a lot more focus on the sounds of the cooking. And I actually get a little bit more descriptive when I discuss the recipes, as opposed to Instagram and YouTube where there's a little bit of editing. I don't put too much editing into the podcast because I want people to hear every single thing as if they were actually in my kitchen cooking and witnessing me cook. And it's been pretty successful so far. I mean, I've only had it launched for the past, I'd say about 2 weeks or so, but I've gotten a lot of downloads, a lot of support. I think it's a great idea, and I think it opens up a lot of doors for different avenues for the food podcast industry to go into.
Yeah, I've listened to all the episodes. I mean, thankfully, it's not a lot. I didn't have like 40. No, I didn't have like 40 episodes to go through. It's like, oh man, I can listen to all these before we talk. So I, on the other hand, have 260 episodes and don't expect that you listened to all of them before you came on the show. If you did, props.
I can guarantee I'll definitely binge every single episode.
Don't go back too far. No, we could talk podcasting forever. Well, that's great. And I'm going to link all that stuff in the show notes so people will be able to find that and follow along on your journey on all of your platforms. Do you have anything that you want to leave our listeners with, like a bit of wisdom, last words, anything before we get out of here today?
Yeah, there's one quote that I always go by, and whether you're a chef, whether you're in lifestyle, whether you're, work a 9 to 5, no matter what industry you're in, I always tell people, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. Never be somebody who feels like you have the answers to everything. Always open the doors for learning. Open yourself up to just taking new experiences in. You never know what you can learn, who you can learn from. I've learned certainly over the past 4 years in my culinary journey that there are people who have given me advice and given me direction on how I can grow as a chef. And I'll continue to learn, until I'm old, because I feel like that's the only way we can grow as a people, is to just constantly learn and just share these experiences.
I love that quote. That's one I've used myself. So I'm glad to hear that you're a fan of that one. I mean, I'm someone who loves learning. I'm a big lifelong learner. It's something I'm trying to instill in my kids I have twins. They're in middle school right now, and school isn't the most exciting, right? And They'll come home and they'll talk about like, oh, I hate this learning stuff. It's like, well, yes, because it's packaged in a way that you don't love, but I'm trying to encourage them to love the process of learning. So they go down the YouTube rabbit hole. So I have some rules about what you can and cannot watch on YouTube. But there's, great cooking content. So my son knows that he's allowed to watch cooking content on YouTube. So just this morning I woke up and he was watching cooking videos, cooking shorts. And I was like, okay, well, it's better than like Skibbity Toilet or whatever kids are into these days.
I have no idea what that is.
Oh, do not do a deep dive on that. So, well, it's great having you on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you for having me. This has been great. As I said before, Chris, I love talking with people about food and just, shared experiences. And I wish you the best of luck on your podcast.
Same to you. And we'll definitely see each other again.
Absolutely.
And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. Thanks so much and have a great week. You're still here? The podcast's over. If you are indeed still here, thanks for taking the time to listen to the show. I'd love to direct you to one place, and that's chefswithoutrestaurants.org. From there, you'll be able to join our email newsletter, get connected in our free Facebook group, and join our personal chef, catering, and food truck database so I can help get you more job leads. And you'll also find a link to our sponsor page where you'll find products and services I love. You pay nothing additional to use these links, but I may get a small commission, which helps keep the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast and organization running. You might even get a discount for using some of these links. As always, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants or send me an email at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.